Hello, everyone. My name's Andrew Williams, and my co-authors are Jamie Goodwin and Patricia Herzog. Jamie is of Wheaton College in Illinois, and Dr. Herzog and I are at IUPUI in Indianapolis. The title of our paper is Cross-Cultural Values, a Meta-Analysis of Major Quantitative Studies in the Last Decade, 2010 to 2020, a bit of a mouthful. The two questions that we're concerned with are, number one, what are the major contemporary contributions to cross-cultural quantitative study of morality, beliefs, and values? And then number two, what are the geographical emphases of those studies? So that comes in two components. One is where the data was collected, what cultures were studied, and number two, where was the research developed and analyzed and theorized? So those are the two questions we're interested in. Our methodology is we did a systematic literature review with two phases. The discovery phase, in which we defined the relevant keywords, consisted of identifying major studies and scholars, as well as typical publication sources for the type of research that we're interested in. That led to three keywords: values, beliefs, and morality, which we have, of course, in our title. The time period we're interested in is, as we've said, 2010 to 2020. It's international in scope, of course, and it's also comparative. So we were not interested in single country or single culture studies, but those that were international and comparative. We looked at six particularly important journals, including Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology and Cross-Cultural Research, for example, but also did keyword search beyond that more broadly. The criteria and searching led to 100 or yielded 178 quantitative studies of culture that fit our criteria, of which 144 are peer-reviewed journal articles. The others are book chapters, dissertations, etc. We include also a small section on history in our paper toward the beginning, and that we divide into several major theories and several major studies of the past that inform current work. So on the theoretical side, we have Kohlberg, who is the founder of moral psychology, who looked to justice as a central pillar of morality, a monist approach, a singular approach. Gilligan expanded that to justice and care. She looked to gendered research or research of gender, male and female, where the males were more interested in justice, females were more interested in care, at least where that was what she posited. Schwader expanded to three: community, autonomy, and divinity. His research was in India, and community and autonomy kind of related to care and justice. And then divinity was a more novel concept brought in. Haidt further pluralized the theory into 5 moral foundations. So you can see this growth in the number of traits or things looked at. And then we have some major studies. I'll just name 3 that are important. Hofstede in 1980 had 4 dimensions, and his study was, I think, 40 plus countries and more than 100,000 people. In 1987, the Chinese Culture Connection did research on Chinese culture and came up with a 5th dimension, the Confucian work dynamism, which became or was renamed long-term versus short-term orientation. And that's notable. That addition is notable in that the research was theorized and developed outside of the Western context. And so that additional dimension was not visible to Western researchers, or not easily visible, or at least the ones that did it, and was visible to non-Western researchers. Then Schwartz and Bilski in 1987, they furthered the universalist approach of Rokeach and Hofstede, as well as the cognitive approach of Kohlberg. Those lines come into the current day. Some major studies that let me talk about the major studies that are involved in our more contemporary time, and then Jamie will get into what we found. So these are in rough periodical or chronological order, excuse me. We have the World Values Survey, which came, or the WVS, which came in 7 waves. It comes out of the Hofstede Cultural Values Scales, which produced or led into the European Values Survey, and that brought into the World Values Survey. That survey, the World Value Survey, is also the basis for the Engelhardt-Welzel cultural maps that some of you may know. A second survey is the Schwartz Values Survey, which was adapted to become the Portrait Values Questionnaire, which was less abstract and more concrete than the Schwartz Values Survey, and thought to be better for broader cultural, cross-cultural application. Then the third is the Social Axioms Survey. That has posits 5 pancultural dimensions of culture. The fourth, the GLOBE study or the GLOBE project, which stands for the Global Leadership and Organizational Behavior Effectiveness project, that has 4 waves to date, the fourth ongoing, and includes quantitative and qualitative research. Then there's the Moral Foundations Questionnaire, Haidt's Moral Foundations Theory, built in significant part off of the Community, Autonomy, and Divinity scale, and developed largely within the US and to some extent Western European context, and is broadening out beyond that, but definitely was developed in the US context. The Survey of Worldviews is the last major one for our criteria that I'll mention. It's an amalgamation of 17 different instruments and might point the way to future quantitative study of culture with lots of different instruments being combined. And that includes globes, the Social Axiom Survey, the Moral Foundations Questionnaire, IC research, Big Six research, Duke Religion Index, et cetera. And 4 other surveys or studies that I'll mention that are also important are the Ethical Values Assessment, Measuring Morality Survey, the Community, Autonomy, and Divinity Scale itself, and then the European Social Survey. So now over to Jamie to take on constructs and what we found. Thank you.
Based on the studies we examined, cross-cultural knowledge can be grouped into 3 primary constructs: belief, morality, and values. These words, belief, morality, and values, are constructed at times distinctly, and other times they're integrated, even operationalized within the same variable. The patterns of contemporary studies reflect this trajectory towards integration. Contemporary studies are typically less interested in demonstrating distinctions between belief, morality, and values, and more interested in identifying which variables inform another topic. For example, Haidt 2013 studied how morality influences politics, while Daniel and colleagues 2015 investigated how values interact with helping behavior. So we'll begin with beliefs. These studies attempt to isolate core assumptions about how the world works. For example, Terrace 2009 stated that belief goes a level deeper than values. While this may or may not be the case, it appears to be operative in some of the studies. For example, Leong and Ba in 2008 defined social axioms as generalized beliefs about categories and events in the social and physical world. Their patterns of asserting the relationship between 2 entities follow the pattern of belief systems. For example, adversity can be overcome by effort. These beliefs were thus distinguished from values, which were conceptualized as statements about the absolute merit or desirability of a single entity. Beau, Mallam, and Saussure, 2014. Then we move to morality. Concepts of morality have advanced over the past decade, with some previous definitions of morality limited to concerns at an individual level about justice and fairness, and others pointing to the big 3 of community, autonomy, and divinity. For example, Haidt and Kessebir in 2010 proposed an expanded approach, which defined morals according to their role, incorporating previous frameworks but also explaining morality beyond the obligations of the individual. Moral systems are interlocking sets of values, virtues, norms, practices, identities, institutions, technologies, and evolved psychological mechanisms that work together to suppress or regulate selfishness and make social life possible, they said. And finally, values. The majority of cross-cultural empirical studies from 2010 to 2020 attend to values. Understood as the bright lights of culture, values can encompass nearly all aspects of life and are known as shared notions of what is good, correct, and desirable. They operate both for individuals and collectivities across situations, affecting how people perceive the world, form preferences, and act within it. Despite efforts to expand cross-cultural studies to understudied areas, there is still a dearth of scholarship that is truly developed within Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But this is obscured by the fact that many of these studies have translated European and North American surveys into many different languages and expanded the data reach. A need to broaden the cultural and geographic perspectives of the researcher, not just the research, is the next horizon for this type of work. Some of the questions we recommend when examining cross-cultural research include: who created the measures and scales being used? Whose theoretical frameworks undergird the research agenda? who interprets the data. Another important highlight from the results is that the idea of between country differences has been challenged, with a number of studies finding greater differences within country. The major exception to this is the remaining strong between country differences in terms of how culture intersects with religiosity. For example, large between country differences were found in agreement or disagreement with the survey items such as, my religious beliefs are what really lie behind my whole approach to life. Regarding limitations, this study did not attend to cross-cultural studies primarily within the United States, nor barometer studies or studies of just one nation. It also took an interdisciplinary approach. While interdisciplinary synthesis can be a helpful way to advance the field of cross-cultural studies, the attention to breadth over depth introduces a potential to miss important nuances within a particular discipline's approach. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and to participate in this presentation. We owe a lot of gratitude to our co-author and mentor, Patricia Snell Herzog, who is also a professor at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. Thanks so much, everyone.